check out our streaming schedule for this week. We've got tons of content in terms of the NFL and college football, as we're going live just about every single day this week. So make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment where we go live. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you a hypothetical scenario that isn't going to happen this year, but bear with me for a moment while I explain everything. The New Orleans Pelicans of the NBA don't play their games at this venue right here, the Superdome. They play their games at the Smoothie King Center, so they play their games in an actual arena. And in this world, they have a game scheduled for February 8th against the Los Angeles Lakers. Obviously, that's a marquee game considering the stature of the Lakers and how popular they are. Now, I want you to imagine that prior to the start of the season, LeBron James announced that this was going to be it. He was going to retire at the end of the season. This was his farewell tour. And after this, one of the greatest basketball players of all time would be gone. The Pelicans brass, at this moment, realizing that this is the final time LeBron is ever coming to New Orleans, decides that this game needs to be played at a bigger venue, and should be played at a bigger venue. We can make a crap ton more money if we play the game somewhere with a higher capacity than the Smoothie King Center. So, they announced that they're moving their game against the Lakers to the venue you've been looking at the entire time, the Superdome, right across the street. We've seen NBA games at football stadiums before. The San Antonio Spurs play games at the Alamodome. The Detroit Pistons play games at the Silverdome. And the Minnesota Timberwolves play games at the Metrodome. So while this is a cool concept, it's not super unrealistic. However, remember what I said about the date for this hypothetical game. It's February 8th, as in one day before the Super Bowl on February 9th. They want to play a basketball game at the Superdome one day before the NFL is going to be holding the Super Bowl at the same venue. Think of how many logistical nightmares that would cause, and obviously, the NFL would balk at this idea saying, wait a second, time out, we need the venue. This isn't going to work. Just the thought of that proposal to play a game, a basketball game, mind you, at the Superdome the day before the Super Bowl seems asinine, right? Well, if you want to learn more about some other asinine proposals and crazy things to happen throughout the history of the NFL and the history of the Super Bowl, then this is the place for you, because we talk about all things NFL history all the time with a new video and a new live stream every single day. So if you like that sort of stuff, then be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Thanks in advance for your support as we try and hit 70,000 subscribers. Well, as crazy as that hypothetical scenario might seem, something like this actually was proposed and actually happened. On January 28, 1990, the Louisiana Superdome hosted Super Bowl 24, as the San Francisco 49ers took on the Denver Broncos. And one day before the Super Bowl, organizers wanted to host a completely different event in a completely different sport at the venue, and host a basketball game between LSU and Notre Dame. As for how that conflict got resolved, you can probably imagine the side that came out on top in the end. But it deserves a deep dive nonetheless, because this is the story behind the bizarre controversy at Super Bowl 24, and how they tried to use the football field for a basketball game on Super Bowl weekend. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and what exactly transpired, we need some context to understand what the original game plan was for LSU basketball, as in this game right here between LSU and Notre Dame. And to do that, we need to go back a year. In 1989, LSU decided to play one of its games at the Superdome against Georgetown, with the idea being to get a ton of exposure by setting the attendance record for a regular season game, and to do it against a really good team. The game was a resounding success. Not only did the game draw more than 54,000 fans into the venue, but LSU pulled off the stunning upset, defeating the number 2 ranked Hoyas 82-80 on a buzzer beater putback. Of all the wins in the history of LSU basketball, the game against Georgetown, considering the circumstances, might be the biggest and most memorable of the bunch for a plethora of reasons, in the regular season at least. So naturally, when you do something really well the first time, you want to do it again. You want a sequel. And seeing as the game against Georgetown took place on January 28th, 1989, as in the final Saturday of January, and that seemed to work out extremely well, LSU wanted a similar date for their 1990 installment, as in this game right here. The plan? Take on Notre Dame at the Superdome on January 27th, 1990. Break the attendance record again, and raise a lot of money for charity to help the homeless. Said LSU head coach Dale Brown on the announcement of this game, "The pulse of America is going to be our theme. This isn't going to be the typical counterfeit thing where we ask for money and then drive away in Rolls Royces with the cash in the trunk. We're going to try and build a shelter for the homeless in New Orleans and break ground on it sometime in the fall before the game is even played. An absolutely admirable cause that should be 100% commended. And it seems like an absolutely incredible idea on paper." And then you realize there's one small problem. There's one teeny tiny problem that we need to talk about, and that is the fact that, oh yeah, January 27th is the day before the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl will be kicking off 24 hours after the game was done. And obviously, if the Super Bowl was somewhere else, this wouldn't be an issue. There's nothing stopping LSU and Notre Dame from playing a basketball game against each other at the Superdome if the Super Bowl was down in Miami, let's say. I'm not sure how much media hype you get from it, and I'm not sure it's necessarily the smartest idea to plan it that weekend, since all the eyes of sports media are going to be focused on the game later in the weekend. But that's an entirely different thing. The problem is that Super Bowl 24 on January 28th was going to be held at the Superdome. This game right here, I think it's fair to say that this game between the San Francisco 49ers and the Denver Broncos has priority from a scheduling standpoint. Now, to be fair to LSU, it's not as though they didn't know about this issue. It's not like this completely sprung up on them, a la the Detroit Red Wings in 1977, when they had no idea that the opening puck drop for a game against the Washington Capitals would be going directly up against the Super Bowl, in an incident that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. LSU officials were not dumb. They knew that this was Super Bowl weekend, and they even said that this probably wouldn't be a problem with the NFL. As LSU head coach Dale Brown said, "The NFL has been very cooperative and is willing to help work out the logistics of the game since it's the day before the Super Bowl." However, let's think about this for just a few seconds. The NFL is super protective of its field. The field takes a long time to plan and to paint and to decorate and to get in pristine condition. You usually cannot have a bad field during the Super Bowl. You can't have the championship game, especially a controlled environment like a dome, be decided by guys slipping all over the place. Laying a basketball court down and then having to get rid of it, and then painting the field and doing all of that stuff, and doing it on less than 1 day of notice? Yeah, good luck with that. Good freaking luck. This isn't like a changeover from basketball to hockey, where it's done all the time and the arenas are ready for it. This is a one-off, special occasion where the field is going to need extra attention considering the magnitude of the situation. Plus, think about it from a television standpoint. A lot of networks broadcast from inside the Superdome. You've got news reports, you've got pre-taped pregame segments taking place inside the venue, because you want that money on location shot. It's the same reason you see reporters standing outside to deliver weather updates, or standing outside the stadium to talk about the game that just happened. It's a visually interesting backdrop that provides relevance and credibility to what you're talking about. All of those shots from inside the Superdome for this Super Bowl right here? Yeah, scratch all of that if you've got a basketball court being used as the backdrop. It would be a logistical nightmare, not just to the Superdome in terms of the quick changeover, but in terms of the news stations and CBS for getting the shots that they need. There wouldn't need to be any changeover with the camera crews from the technical side, at least, seeing as CBS had the rights to televise both the LSU Notre Dame game and the Super Bowl. But other than that, the logistics would be way too much to deal with. And on top of that, what incentive would the NFL have to cooperate with LSU here? This feels like when you want to do something with a friend, your friend awkwardly tags someone else along that you weren't expecting, and you don't really vibe with, and you pretend to make it work and accommodate them, because you don't want to look like the bad guy. But deep down, you're just frustrated with the situation. At least for a week, nothing is taking place in the venue prior to the Super Bowl. A good example of this was what transpired at Super Bowl XVI, held at the Pontiac Silverdome. which was also the venue to the Detroit Pistons of the NBA. The Super Bowl was taking place on January 24th, 1982, and the Pistons' last home game prior to the Super Bowl was January 16th against the Boston Celtics. After that, the Pistons went on a 5-game road trip. They didn't play a game at home on January 23rd or anything like that. That would be insane. The changeover just wouldn't be feasible and would be a logistical nightmare in so many ways. You need at least a week if you're the NFL and throwing on the Super Bowl in a venue. So with all of that in mind, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to you that this controversy on Super Bowl 24 was hashed out with LSU being the odd one out. Sort of. This game right here still went on at the Superdome, and much like the first meeting, LSU won the game. This time, as the favorites and not the underdogs, they won in rather convincing fashion against Notre Dame, taking it by a final score of 87-64 in a game that sold over 66,000 tickets, but had just under 45,000 spectators due to inclement weather and a major car crash on the roads of the venue backing things up. LSU dominated this one, thanks in part to a monster performance offensively and defensively by this little-known player known as Shaquille O'Neal. You may have heard of him before. He's the guy that's selling you insurance ads with the General. However, as you can probably expect, this game did not take place the day before the Super Bowl. That never stood a chance. The NFL very quickly put a stop to those plans once they realized that this would be asinine. Instead, the game got moved from January 27th to January 20th, taking place 8 days before the Super Bowl instead of 1 day before. This was ample time to do the changeover, make sure the field was right, and get everything lined up, and it felt pretty similarly in the timeline to what happened at the Superdome with Super Bowl 16. The NFL did help LSU out by saying that they supported their cause, and then as a result, all of the leftover food from the Super Bowl would be given to homeless shelters after the game. And even though LSU was a bit bummed about having to move the game up a week so as not to interfere with the Superdome's preparations, Notre Dame didn't seem to mind it one bit. Said head coach Digger Phelps, "I was not really sold on the idea of playing this game at first, until I saw the magnitude of what could be done. It's the week before the Super Bowl, and it's like this is going to tip off the Super Bowl week as far as New Orleans is concerned. It should make for an awareness of the homeless around the country." In the end, this was a pretty fair compromise. The NFL rejected wholeheartedly at playing the game the day before the Super Bowl, but LSU still got to play this game right here at the Superdome 1 week before, and the NFL donated leftover food to homeless shelters to keep with LSU's mission as to why this game was played in the first place. It's a bummer that both of these games were blowouts, seeing as the LSU game was a 23-point drubbing, and Super Bowl 24 was the worst Super Bowl of all time, with the 49ers winning at 55-10 and outscoring the Broncos by 45 points, which was a 7-possession game back then. However, for the business side of things at least, everything seemed to work out, even if it took a very weird and wacky path to get there. Oddly enough, this wasn't the last time that there was a controversy involving the scheduling of the Super Bowl at the Superdome. You might recall a decade later at Super Bowl 36 that the game was originally supposed to be played on the final Sunday of January, as it had been for quite some time. However, due to the attacks on September 11th, the NFL had to push the game back and push their season back by 1 week, meaning that the Super Bowl was now on Sunday, February 3rd. Shouldn't be a problem, right? Well, the Superdome was already being used that day for a convention, and the NFL just pushed the game back, thinking that the Superdome was going to be available, not realizing that the Superdome was already booked. That could be a video for a future time, but at the end of the day, the organization's compromised, and the NFL ended up winning in the end. Because I think it's safe to say that most of the time, when it comes to two businesses, if one of them is the NFL is usually going to find a way to win. Super Bowl 24 was a bizarre game in more ways than one. Of course, you have the fact that this was a historic blowout. You had a massive controversy involving the Denver Broncos in the build-up to the game, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. You had some interesting advertisements that ended up getting banned shortly after due to their risque nature, and ads that only aired once as a result. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And you had this entire controversy involving LSU and the idea that the game could be played on what was, not even 24 hours before scheduled kickoff, a basketball court. Both parties got to use the venue at least, even if LSU didn't exactly get what they wanted from a date and scheduling perspective. So this could have been a lot uglier and a lot messier. But it is an interesting thing to think about nonetheless. Because in January of 1990, as LSU found out, scheduling a game in the same venue as the Superdome, just one day before the Superdome was going to host the Super Bowl, was anything but a slam dunk. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.